ప్రేమ స్వరూపులారా, విద్యార్థులారా, ఓ ఐ
Om Shri Sai Ram and welcome to InSAIde Scoop, a podcast that brings you practical servings of Swami's sweetest teachings. Joining us today on our season finale is the woman who conceived this podcast and has been away for some time while I've been temporarily filling her position. Welcome back, Neera. It's wonderful to have you join us this time as not the one who asks questions, but the one who answers them. Now, as most of you listeners would already be familiar, Neera serves the Satyasai International Organization as the Deputy Zone 4 Young Adult Coordinator, and professionally, she is a lawyer. Sairam, Neera, it's lovely to host you today.
Sairam, Pia, it's lovely to be here. It's very strange to be on this side of the table.
Well, let me just inform the listeners that Neera had not left us. Neera was actually very busy with her wedding. So on behalf of all InSAIde Scoop listeners, I'd like to congratulate you to starting a new chapter as a married woman in your life.
Thank you so much.
I think it's very timely that you've gotten married because our topic for today is the question, do relationships hamper my spiritual progress? Now, most of us within the Sai fold are familiar with the strong emphasis that is maintained on the separation between men and women, right from the seating arrangements to performances to the way we address the opposite sex. Females are our sisters and males are our brothers. So I want to begin with exploring what is the rationale behind maintaining this male-female separation.
Okay, so I need to begin with a disclaimer, sis. I am in no way qualified to be speaking about any topic, let alone one as tricky as this. So I really pray that it is Swami that speaks through me and it is He who listens through you and all our dear listeners. So Professor S. Bashiruddin, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's an ardent devotee of Swami. He had the blissful privilege of traveling with Swami from Ooty to Bangalore once. And when he was seated in the front of the vehicle, he had the chance to ask Swami some very personal questions during this 5-hour journey. He observed that in Sai gatherings, as you pointed out, men and women will sit separately for darshan, personal interviews, prayers. And so out of curiosity, he asked Swami, why do men and women sit separately? And it seems to be a very extreme practice. And Swami replied, in the Vedic period, men and women sat separately for prayers because when you mix men and women, and it's so beautiful what he says, there will not be prayers but mere hysteria and a lack of meditative concentration. I mean, he's not wrong, Sissy. Swami is extremely practical and only has one goal, our spiritual progress. And as spiritual aspirants, I'm sure you have also experienced this. We are so susceptible to external interference. We have not mastered the mind. So we need the most conducive environment with at least distractions. And that's what our Master Swami does. Instead of pretending like it's not an issue, he's so progressive and compassionate. From early on, he acknowledged our tendencies as humans to be easily tempted, easily distracted by pleasures and desires. And, even from my experience with teen youth class, Bal Vikas, camps, there was always gender segregation, as I'm sure you experienced. And there was so much merit to it because I could express myself so freely and really commit to the lessons that were being taught, Sissy. And Swami wants us to operate at the level of the soul. That's the goal. That's the gold standard that he sets for us, although it's extremely high. And when there are opposite genders, the reality is, especially at a young age, the mind will start to stray. We will come down to that level of the mind and thoughts will creep in like, oh, I wonder if what he thinks while I'm singing this bhajan, or if I say this during the satsang, I wonder if he's judging me, or even come down to the level of the body and start indulging our senses and having these thoughts, oh, he's so attractive. But Swami wants more from us. He knows we are capable of more, and he knows we are able to achieve this with a little discipline and guidance. That's my opinion, Sissy.
Yeah, I loved what you said, Neera, that the reality is that we are susceptible to so many distractions due to the nature of our mind and bodily senses, and so it is out of Swami's compassion to facilitate our spiritual progress that we maintain this discipline of male and female separation. Okay, that brings me to my next question. Is it necessary to view all the females as our sisters and all the males as our brothers within the fold? And if so, why? Why do we need this brother-sister categorization? And is it inappropriate if we develop romantic feelings for someone within the fold who we are expected to view as brother or sister?
This is a really excellent question, I must say, Pia. Swami, I think, cultivated the use of the word brother and sister to further his main goal, that is for us to realize our inherent divinity. These words, they foster a sense of oneness and remind us that we come from the same source, like brother and sister, that we are all his children, all one. And I think it achieves that, that spirit of oneness does come alive because we consciously refer to each other as bro and sis. That was the rationale. But again, whatever Swami does, he is not operating at the level of Maya, of worldly labels and man-made relationships. How many times he's mentioned in discourses that all our relationships, whether parents, siblings, friends, spouses, are just bodily relationships, okay? Mere bondage unless we can detach. So he didn't, I think, intend for us to refer to brother and sister in a literal sense. It is the feeling that matters. Do you feel one with these people you are referring to as brother and sister? Do you feel so much love for the other because you are the same? You are both his. And so when romantic feelings creep in, I don't think it's inappropriate because of the fact that we call each other brother and sis. That would be taking things too literally. I don't think anything is inappropriate to Swami. He is beyond good and bad. To him, our actions, thoughts, and feelings are either liberating or binding. He doesn't love us less because we have romantic feelings. He may display disappointment because it affects our spiritual progress. It may affect our spiritual progress, but how perfect and whole we are to him remains the same.
Right.
And whether it is liberating or binding, having these romantic feelings towards these brothers and sisters is actually a very personal and practical exercise. Traditionally, I think why it's frowned upon is because, these romantic feelings are being evoked in places of worship, where we're doing things where our focus is meant to be on Swami, ourselves, satsang, bhajans, meditation. So it can be quite binding to have your attention diverted from this spiritual pursuit. And some people might argue, okay, but I'm meeting these people in a social context. I'm having lunch with them or dinner with them, not in a spiritual context. But think about it, it's so hard to isolate our feelings and not allow them to creep in when we meet the same people in a spiritual context, right, Sissy?
Yeah.
So all these guidelines from Swami are merely him showing us his compassion and omniscience. He doesn't prescribe to control or to oppress. He does so because he truly understands the limitations of being human, how difficult it is to balance the real and unreal and control the mind. And so he prescribes things that will make our journey a little less messy, a little less complicated.
That was brilliant, Neera. I totally agree with what you said, that Swami has laid out these guidelines for us to ensure that our journey doesn't get too messy. Okay, now I want to ask you a follow-up question. Does the process of dating affect our spiritual progress? And if so, how? And are there any general guidelines and boundaries that we need to be mindful of to ensure that our spiritual progress is not hampered through the process of dating?
To be very honest, Sissy, I think nothing can affect our spiritual progress unless we will it or we allow it to. It all comes down to us. We have full autonomy. In some relationships, you will require more willpower, more effort, more consistency, more commitment, and more single-mindedness. In others, less is required. That to me is the only distinction. So my guideline would be to decide for ourselves how important spiritual progress is to us. In our daily to-do lists, where does it stand? In our list of priorities, where does it sit? That would be my only guidelines, Sissy.
Right. And where should it stand?
Where should it stand, Sissy? I think that if this stands at the top, everything in life just falls into place so effortlessly and beautifully.
Sissy, do we need a partner who shares a similar spiritual wavelength as us in order for us to grow spiritually?
So Sissy, I've had relationships where that person was not spiritually inclined, but because it was such a difficult relationship, my relationship with Swami grew. I did more sadhana. I started constantly annoying him and bugging him and forcing myself to meditate because of circumstances. And look at Mirabai. Her husband Rana, do you think they shared a spiritual wavelength? But by the end of her life, she was one with Krishna. But I've also had relationships where, and my husband, he's so spiritually inclined, and it inspires me every day. It got me more involved in the organization. But again, if I reflect, how it affected me really depends on my level of self-motivation. I'm sure when I was younger, I was more impressionable and influential, but and so it would have affected my progress a lot more. But when you mature, it's really all in your hands. And I think the sharing a spiritual wavelength affects the relationship more than it affects you. A relationship founded on the bedrock of spirituality is incredibly blissful because it's just two souls helping each other reach home, Sissy?
That's so beautifully put. Okay, then what is your advice for those of us whose romantic partners or potential love interests do not share the same spiritual beliefs and ideas as one does? So in this case, if we want to grow together towards Swami, but our partner doesn't seem spiritually receptive, then what should one do?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Sissy, and a very important one to think about. I don't think we need to share the same spiritual beliefs or the same guru or master, but I do think it's critical to share the same values and principles. So for example, if I were to break that down, it would be like, is loving all and serving all, despite people's imperfections, important? Is being gentle and kind important? Is prioritizing time for self-reflection, contemplation, self-improvement, is that important? Is being supportive of each other's unique spiritual beliefs and ensuring that we never come in the way of that person's progress important? And this one is a big one, is being open to new ideas with mutual respect, not being like cynical or dismissive to another's worldview, important. And I know two married couples. Couple A, I'll call them Rachel and Ross. Both of them are Hindu, but Rachel is Sai and Ross does not believe in Sai Baba. And I noticed that Rachel's faith has dwindled since the marriage. But it's not because Ross is not Sai, it's because Ross constantly questions Sai Baba in a very cynical, dismissive way. So the values don't align, in my opinion, and that's the problem. And I know another couple B, Monica and Chandler, we're calling them. Monica is Christian, non-Sai, not religious, and Chandler is Hindu, Sai, and very, very spiritual. And their bond is just exquisite. You really witnessed unconditional love at play because they each go out of their way to ensure both are happy spiritually and in life. Chandler has an altar, he does his prayers, he goes for bhajans without Monica. Monica doesn't complain or feel left out, she goes to church, etc. But they do a lot of things together. So what Chandler does is he takes Swami's Chinna Kadas and he's turned it into a podcast. And Monica, his wife, is a jingle artist. Okay. And so she does all the quirky bits in the podcast, like the character voices. And so they together have created this tradition of imparting values to their children and society, even though she doesn't believe in Swami, but she's doing this because, she believes in the values, and they're doing this together. So I think sharing the same principles and the same beliefs are what's important in a life partner.
Excellent, Sisu. I think that's great advice, and I loved your friends' references. Okay, now let's talk about physical intimacy. How should young adults navigate the subject of physical intimacy in dating and in our romantic relationships?
My personal view is that personal intimacy is just another aspect of this game of life, which Swami tells us to play, but he tells us not to get entangled, in this another tentacle of Maya. However, in reality, just like all other temptations, whether it's eating non-veg, alcohol, smoking, these are habits that are extremely difficult to control because they're so pleasurable. And so you can understand why Swami prohibits or discourages us from indulging in these desires. Swami wants us to live at the highest level of being, Atma level. And the danger with physical intimacy is getting trapped in the bodily level of being because it's so pleasurable and we don't deepen our experience of life. He wants us to experience the highest level of pleasure, the pleasure of being in full reign of our senses, of our mind. I imagine that to be a very expansive place, and where you're not affected by anything, that bliss, the pleasure of divine love. Happiness is union with Swami in God. And we can't deny that physical intimacy, just like other desires, can limit this ability to achieve this more lasting bliss, because we think that this is bliss, this pleasure is bliss, and that there's nothing else more superior. But there is so much more, and Swami doesn't want us to be deprived of that. So I don't think there is a need to deny ourselves of a biological need, because suppressing this desire can also create more harm. But recognizing the desire, deciding if we want to be bound by it or to be liberated by it, is entirely a personal choice, which will have its consequences. There's no right or wrong, but there are consequences. If we indulge in binding activities, we will continue to be bound. And whatever Swami prescribes is just the highway route to merging with him. But if you want to take the scenic route, he will love you no less. It just takes longer to get there.
Beautiful, Neera. That was really well said. I have a follow-up question. How does one know if one is being indulgent in their desires for physical intimacy, or is this healthy?
I think how you feel after and why you're doing it. If you're overwhelmed with guilt after that, that's perhaps a sign that, it may not be what your soul wants for you at this time. And ask yourself why you're doing it. Are you in control, or are you being hijacked by things that you don't want to be hijacked by? And choose for yourself.
So my final question for today, Neera, is what are some practical tips for nourishing our love life in a way that it supports rather than hampers our spiritual progress?
See, I think the beauty of the spiritual journey is that it's just between you and him. It's a constant conversation of all sorts of emotions, but this intoxication with the divine is a solo journey. So as long as you're self-motivated, self-aware, building your spiritual reservoir with your reading, your chanting, your whatever it is that keeps you in conversation with something deeper than this reality that we live in, that will hold you in good stead. And if you're in a relationship, that's seeing God in that person and being thankful to God for this person, and just constantly including God in that relationship. That is what that God just becomes an extension of who you are. So it really doesn't matter who you're with anymore and what your personal love life or relationship is like. Yeah.
Lovely, Sisu. I think that's an incredible note for us to end our discussion on for today. Dear listeners, it's now time for some prasadam pills. 1. The mind and the senses are susceptible to a myriad of distractions, and so the rationale behind maintaining the male-female separation within the Sai fold is to very practically minimize these distractions and guide us toward focusing our attention on our spiritual progress with single-pointedness. 2. The spirit behind using the terms brother and sister within the fold is to foster a sense of oneness. It is to cultivate an understanding that we have all come from God and we all belong to God. It is to remind ourselves of the deep love that we must have for all as divine embodiments, knowing that verily we are God. 3. If we develop romantic feelings for someone within the fold, it is not inappropriate because we are expected to see them as literally our brother or sister. That would be taking things too superficially. Indeed, there is nothing inappropriate in the eyes of Swami because we are always perfect and whole in his eyes, and Swami's love is truly unconditional. The reason why romantic relationships are traditionally discouraged from being actively pursued within the fold is not so that we are oppressed or controlled, but rather because they may potentially serve as diversions from our spiritual pursuits. And so Swami has laid out these guidelines for us to ensure that our journey doesn't become too complicated with too many binding distractions. 4. Our individual spiritual progress depends on us and our levels of self-motivation and commitment. Therefore, if we do not share a similar spiritual wavelength with our partner, it does not mean that we as individuals cannot progress spiritually, and the example of Mirabai stands testament to this. Meanwhile, if we do share a similar spiritual wavelength with our partner, more than it affecting our individual spiritual progress, it affects the nature of the relationship. Indeed, a relationship that is built on the cornerstone of true spirituality and mutual divine love is a blissful one where two souls may remind each other of their journey back home. 5. The risk associated with indulging pleasures of physical intimacy is that it may bind us at the physical level of our bodily senses, because we may believe that the fulfillment of these physical desires is the only bliss that exists. But that is not the highest level of bliss, and Swami wishes for us to experience that eternal bliss at the Atmic level, where we transcend beyond these ephemeral pleasures and experience that expansive joy of divine love. Swami has prescribed for us to follow the highway to reach that liberating union with God. Now, whether we choose the binding path or the liberating one, while there is no right or wrong in Swami's eyes, there are consequences of our choices that we will have to walk through. If we choose the binding path over the liberating one, it does not mean that Swami loves us any less. It just means that our journey to reaching that eternal bliss may be longer. 6. Our spiritual journey is one we all have to traverse individually. And so, irrespective of whomsoever we are with and what their spiritual wavelength is, for us to nourish our love life in a way that it supports rather than hampers our spiritual progress, we ought to practice seeing God in our partner, affirming gratitude to God for our partner, and bringing God into the relationship as an extension of who we truly are. Dear listeners, it's been wonderful hosting Season 2 of InSAIde Scoop. Thank you so much for tuning in this season and for reaching out to the InSAIde Scoop team with all your feedback. On behalf of the team, we want to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all of you listeners and to all the speakers who generously shared their wisdom and experiences with us, and of course, to Swami for giving us the opportunity to remember him and reflect on his teachings. Till next time, happy scooping!